I upload daily NBA content, so if that is something that interests you, then subscribe. Also, drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference. So, Michael Jordan's either current or former agent recently came out with some comments saying that Jordan today would average 60 points per game on 75% shooting. I'm not going to go into all of the exact details, but that's the vague one that I want to go over in today's video. So this is obviously a little bit of an exaggeration, at least I would hope it would be, but I'm going to focus more on this general narrative and this general thing that a lot of fans of the older NBA and older NBA players say themselves. I know that Reggie Miller said that he would average like 35 in today's NBA, and probably not. But I want to talk about how scores from the past would translate into the modern NBA, as well as how stupid it is that it gets exaggerated to the point where people are saying that Michael Jordan would have averaged 60 points per game on 75% shooting, because that is fucking ridiculous. But before I dive into the negatives, I do want to make the point that yes, Michael Jordan would be better as a talent in today's NBA. I have not a doubt in my mind about that because of spacing. Ironically, what former NBA fans or older NBA fans hate about the modern NBA in its shooting would be Michael Jordan's greatest strength playing in the NBA today. Not because he is a particularly good three-point shooter, he was not a good three-point shooter, but because the players on his team would all be pretty damn good three-point shooters. So if he went to a team that had a lot of spacing, you can't really double team Michael Jordan, or else you're going to risk him finding somebody on the perimeter who's going to knock down a three-pointer. If you look back at Jordan on the Bulls were a better three-point shooting team than most, but they still were not a three-point shooting team because very few teams in the 90s could even be categorized as that. Teams that were categorized as three-point shooting teams back in the 90s, like the Houston Rockets, shot like 23s a game, which would be bottom of the league today. So the Bulls were not a three-point shooting team any more than any other team in the 90s, which is to say they were not a three-point shooting team really at all. They had specialists like Steve Kerr and Judd Buechler, and Scottie Pippen was pretty decent from outside, but that was pretty much the extent of it in terms of their three-point shooting. But in the modern NBA, surrounded by a whole bunch of shooters, Michael Jordan would be able to kill it in the isolation even more than he did in the 90s because he'd have more space, and teams would have to be more concerned about double teaming him. Have Michael Jordan be a one-on-one matchup consistently, and that's going to be an issue. It's kind of similar to what the Houston Rockets do with James Harden, except A, Michael Jordan is significantly better than James Harden, and B, I would hope that whatever team Jordan was on would be better with its offensive system to where it's not that basic. But keeping it basic, MJ would be able to kill it in the modern NBA, and I do think he would benefit far more, and he would be a better player in today's NBA in comparison to what he was in the 90s. Or rather, maybe not a better player, but at least on the surface he would come off as better because he doesn't have to deal with these things that held him back in a 90s setting. But now let me talk about the reason why a lot of these people, like Jordan's agent, claim that he would be better in the NBA and why those reasons are stupid. So the two biggest ones, or one of the ones that the agent made actually that I want to point out, is that he believes there was 25 superstars in the 90s, maybe in total, but like he made it seem like there were 25 superstars at a time in the 90s, which that has never been the case. Back in Jordan's time, there were probably like 5 or 6 players, including him, that I would consider a superstar, and that's not all that different from what I would consider it now. So I'm not going to make a huge talent pool argument, though I would argue the actual floor has improved while the ceiling has gotten a little bit better. But just generally speaking, 25 superstars is a fucking ridiculous thing to say for any era. Any more than 10 is kind of ridiculous to say, at least if you have my definition of a superstar. But like, unless you think almost everyone playing in the All-Star game is a superstar, then there are not that many superstars at any point in NBA history. But the two biggest reasons why people tend to believe that Michael Jordan would average ridiculous numbers in the modern NBA is A, the modern NBA is soft now in comparison to the 90s at the very least, and B, I don't know why I'm putting up numbers and saying letters, but whatever. B, defense is a lot worse today than it was in the 90s. Both of these things have elements of truth to them, but are incredibly exaggerated, and actually B, I would argue, is just completely untrue. So talking about the first one, the NBA is more soft today. That really annoys me. Not that it's not true, it's just that I don't agree with the notion that basketball was better when you were allowed to punch a player in the face and call that defense. Like, when people talk about the bad boy Pistons, they act like, oh yeah, Michael Jordan was so much tougher because he had to deal with that. I would just say it was bullshit that he had to deal with that, and he was able to overcome it. And I think any other legend of that caliber, or close to it I should say, because Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time, don't at me, would be able to overcome that eventually. It's stupid that Michael Jordan had to get over a bunch of players just being able to knock him out of the sky without getting any level of anything more than a flagrant one. Like, that was dumb. And I think that the modern NBA is better with that rules. It's okay to be physical, but it's not okay to be physical to the point of assault. I don't think that's actual basketball. I think that's some macho bullshit. And then on top of that, for B, defense is better today than it has ever been. Sorry, that's just how it is. Now, don't get me wrong, offenses are better now today than they were in the 90s, but that's not because the defense got worse. It's because the shooting improved. It's a very basic concept that I feel like I'm going insane when I explain it to fans of the older NBA, why spacing is so important. When everyone on the court can shoot at a very good rate, that makes it a lot harder to bring help defense because you have to pick your poison. And often you're going to give an open look just because you have to either let Michael Jordan in this scenario go one-on-one, or you have to leave a very good three-point shooter wide open. And that is a problem, and it makes defense a lot more difficult. But because of that, defenders have become more and more versatile. The ability to defend 1 through 5, there are more players that can do that now than there have been probably throughout NBA history. No hyperbole. It takes more skill, more intelligence to play defense in the modern NBA than it did in the 90s. And while many 90s defenders would still be very good in the modern NBA, there's no doubt about that, it is pretty stupid to me to say that defense today is bad. Not the case. Offense is just so much better because of three-point shooting. There's a reason the NBA has gone in this direction. Whether you find three-point shooting entertaining or not, it's more effective offensively, and that's why every team in the league does it. Teams are not catering to what you find entertaining, they're catering to what wins. So that should speak volumes for the fact that that's the direction that every team in the league, except for maybe the Spurs, has tried to go. But let's actually have the conversation about what Michael Jordan would average in the modern NBA. So I believe he could average 35 to, honestly, if he really wanted to, he could have probably averaged 40 points on decent enough efficiency. The guy did average at one point 37 points per game in the 80s when the pace was slower and there was absolutely zero spacing on his team back then. So yeah, he could average 40 in the modern NBA if he really wanted to. But if I was going to wager, I'd say he'd be a consistent 30 points per game if he was trying to contend. Because I've made this point before, high scoring seasons at that level of absurdity are not good. It's okay to be the best scorer in the league, have a scoring title even. Michael Jordan, I'm pretty sure, had the scoring title every single season that he won a championship, and he had 10 in total, I believe. But actually winning a championship, the amount of seasons where someone has averaged 35 plus points per game, if I'm remembering incorrectly, which I don't think I am, I know I did this research a while ago, I'm pretty sure that no one has won a championship other than maybe Rick Barry, where they averaged 35 points per game in the regular season, because that much points per game from one player shows an over-reliance on that one player, either that or that one player selfishly taking too many shots. Michael Jordan could average 40 points per game in the modern NBA, but that would not be good for his team. Averaging that many points is not good for your team. It shows a lack of ability outside of your team and itself on its own. So, Michael Jordan, in today's game, I would say would average around 30 points per game, and he'd be very efficient with it. I also think he would shoot more threes and start learning to be better at three-point shooting, because that's what's happening in the modern NBA, and that's what he needs to adapt to. Michael Jordan is someone who would adapt with the times. But I would also wager that Michael Jordan benefited from the 90s quite significantly in comparison to what he would if he played in the modern NBA. Even though his game in itself would benefit quite significantly from the amount of three-point shooting there is and how much spacing he would have, I would also argue that in the era of player movement and player liberation, there would be teams that would stand in his way more so than there were in the 90s. In the 90s, very few of the teams that he actually faced were a product of players coming together. As a matter of fact, if I'm thinking about it, I believe the 93 Suns are the only team that had a star player on that team that was not drafted there or signed a long time ago. Like Charles Barkley, I believe, was it. The Blazers, I think Terry Porter might have been on a different team before the Blazers. I could be mistaken, but I know Clyde Drexler wasn't. I know in the case of the Lakers, Magic Johnson was obviously drafted by the Lakers, and then with the Jazz, John Stockton and Karl Malone were drafted by them. Gary Payton and Sean Kemp were both Seattle Supersonics. So that wasn't really the case either. So, like with LeBron James, for example, LeBron was able to be very dominant in the modern NBA, and by no means is that impossible. However, because of the era of player movement, a team like the 2017 Warriors stood up in his way and prevented him from winning more championships. And that is something that I think would very well happen with Michael Jordan. Now, Michael Jordan could also be a part of this and go join a team with a bunch of other superstar players, which would be ironic considering how much NBA fans or older NBA fans give Jordan praise for not doing that. But the fact that there are so many teams that can get really high and then it kind of dissipate, I don't think a 6-0 thing would be possible in the modern NBA. I just don't. Like, I just don't think that's possible. With how many teams stand up and fall down and new teams rise and new teams fall, just simply put, in the era of player movement, being able to dominate at that level does not work like it did in the 90s. So even though Michael Jordan in the modern NBA would be a better basketball player because of the benefits he would see from spacing, unfortunately also because this era includes a lot more player movement, if Michael Jordan was dominating the league, some of the superstars would get frustrated, they'd be free agents at the same time, and they would go join up together and stand in front of his way. And it's for that reason that Michael Jordan would probably be worse in the modern NBA, or at least for his career-wise. Again, talent-wise, better. Career-wise, I doubt he stands out as much as he did in the circumstances in the 90s. And Michael Jordan would not average 60 points per game on 75% shooting. I really don't feel like I should have to say that, but here we are. If you want to support this content outside of just your like and subscription, I do have a Patreon. I just posted a new 2K talk over there about the Atlanta Hawks, so if that's something that interests you, go check that out. Link is going to be in the description. That is the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.